Judgment day for Chelsea's season is almost upon us. Tomorrow afternoon, the Premier League season of 24-25 will conclude and Chelsea's Champions League fate will be defined at Nottingham Forest. This is my preview, team selector, thoughts, feelings and everything, including a lot of nerves, I'm sure, for many of you like myself regarding this game. It's a huge game. It really is. And in some ways, it's bizarre to walk into a game at this stage of a league season compared to, say, a cup competition where you get to a final. And obviously, a final, there's no in between. You're either ecstatic winning the game or devastated losing it. With a league season, you'd think you'd know your fate pretty consistent over the course of the season. And Chelsea's kind of conclusion of the season, at least for me personally, you may feel differently. If Chelsea do not get Champions League football, I will be looking back on the season very differently to if they do secure Champions League football. I know there is some nuance within that. That's not to say Moises Caicedo's brilliant season didn't happen and we just write it off. Some of the improvements of players, you can say, didn't happen. Some of the big wins we've enjoyed this season haven't happened. And obviously the good run earlier in the season. But undeniably, Chelsea not securing Champions League football will at the very least feel like Chelsea have stood still. They have not moved forward in 12 months, which I think is a failure in my point of view. And sure, should it be coming down to one game? Can you assess a whole season based on one result? But that is what it is. It's the fine margins, right? And I don't think that I'm being unfair by my categorization. My kind of prediction in the summer was us getting Champions League football. I predicted us to get fifth. So I wasn't actually that negative in terms of my prediction for Chelsea. And them doing that, I think, is kind of the base level of expectation this year. It was getting back in the Champions League. Now, of course, huge pressure on Chelsea because they're away, not only away from home where they haven't been great, but they're away from home directly facing a team who could also get Champions League qualification. There are so many permutations to this game that I know CFC Daily on Twitter has probably extensively drawn out, and there is a way to overthink all of this. I think it is pretty simple. I think it's, unless we know watching it, if Chelsea aren't winning and then for some reason Man United decide to turn up, and I know Villa historically don't have a great record at Old Trafford, but realistically, I think 90% chance Chelsea don't win tomorrow, they will not get Champions League football. And I think in some ways, do they deserve to get Champions League football if they don't win tomorrow? Because you're going away to a direct rival. We've only won one away game since mid-December in the Premier League. That is an unacceptable run that really could potentially be the thing that costs Chelsea. So many permutations. Forest's own ambitions to end what has been a really good season for them in the biggest way at home is going to put so much pressure on Chelsea, the hostile crowd, and whether Chelsea can thrive in that environment when we've seen away from home quite recently, they do not fare that well. And obviously some of the big team selection choices that Enzo Maresca has to make. Let's look at Nottingham Forest. So, I know a lot of people are quite down on Forest, just frustrated. Like when you look at some of their numbers, they're 19th for average possession, which I mean really does sum up how in some ways stats can be a bit irrelevant, and why possession in particular, I've consistently said this. Possession as a stat is pretty irrelevant. It's what you do with the ball at your feet that makes a huge difference. But stylistically in an era, and especially contrasted with Chelsea, a team that wants to have a lot of the ball, it really does show the, as I say, just having the ball a lot doesn't make you a good football team. It's what you do with that ball that makes all the difference. They're second in the league for clean sheets, so defensively, they've been immaculate under Nuno Espirito Santo, but they're 15th for XG, shots on target, full team. So they really have outperformed expectation. That is undeniable this year. And even if Nottingham Forest fall short tomorrow, which of course all of us hope they do, meaning that Chelsea, of course Chelsea, there is a scenario where Chelsea and Forest both fall short of Champions League qualification. But even if they do fall short, I still think this has been an incredible season for Forest. When you factor in where they were 12 months ago, even 12 months ago when Chelsea last visited their ground and they were still kind of scared about relegation, it just shows you a good transfer window can make all the difference. They've made some amazing signings, but on top of that, Milenkovic, I think, has been a really great signing. Matt Sells in goal has been great example of why that position is so crucial, and as well a goal scoring centre forward, someone who has led the line amazingly. And Chris Wood is not he's not a sensational kind of generational forward. This is a guy who's been around actually quite a long time now. But the burst he's had later on in his career is a testament to him as an individual and for Nuno Espirito Santo in some way kind of reviving the work he did quite well earlier in his career at Wolves. A great counter-attacking team, a physical team, a team that can overwhelm. You have some really good talented individuals. In the case of this team, you are looking at Morgan Gibbs-White. You are even looking at a player like Alanga, who has really found new life, like Callum Hudson-Odoi, away from big clubs like Man United and Chelsea, right? Those environments have maybe not been the best for them. So we know that Nottingham Forest are, in terms of their direct play, they want to sit deep, they want to hit teams on transition. And I think that's what makes this a very intriguing game, and kind of how do you approach it from a Chelsea point of view, because Chelsea have been constructed to have the ball and to take control of games. However, that is what Nottingham Forest want. I don't think Forest want a game where Chelsea are sitting a little bit deeper, allowing them a bit more of the ball, where they have to take command of the game and potentially expose themselves defensively to situations that they probably haven't been in that frequently this year. And it's how that dynamic goes and whether Chelsea and Maresca can take advantage of that. Because you've kind of got to look at it like this. Forest have to win the game. They have to go at Chelsea. And it's whether Chelsea, they failed miserably away at Newcastle. But if you can take that kind of hostility and kind of wave of momentum that will be behind the Forest team from their home crowd and kind of use it against them in the sense that they are built more to play on the counter-attack, that could be huge for Chelsea, especially a Chelsea team that I still believe can be a great transitional team, a great team of hurting opposition, especially when they come at Chelsea. And again, will that happen through the course of the game? Game state, other results could make it quite a unique affair, because it is a final effectively. This is not your casual kind of normal Premier League game. This is a winner takes all effectively for Champions League qualification, especially in the case of Chelsea. So I think that is something to factor in as well, and how Chelsea counteract that. They're coming up against a team who defensively, and the way they're structured, there are a lot of fears about how Chelsea would break down that team, right? And kind of, Chelsea struggles to break down opposition who sit deep. That has been a problem for Maresca throughout the course of the season. And without an obvious focal point, without a natural centre forward, how does Enzo Maresca counter that? We know that you've got the likes of Marco Correa, who will pop up and potentially score a huge goal. But generally in the course of the game, I think that is still a concern for Chelsea of how potentially they're going to look to break down Forest when they do have the ball. So it's going to be fine margins. I think the next two games are kind of going to go in a similar way. I think if Chelsea win them, they're going to be tight. They're going to be games like against Man United. And the one thing I spoke about with Louis on the Chelsea Echo is that Maresca's control can be seen as a negative. I've criticised it before in possession when you're going at a team and kind of wanting to express yourself, get the best out of players, feel like a team that is kind of unleashed a bit. But I think one of the things that where we've undeniably seen an improvement this year is defensively, Chelsea holding on to a lead. We saw this, and I gave him credit for it, after going 1-0 up against Man United. Chelsea are a lot better at shutting down games. And I think that kind of approach works much better in these type of scenarios, in kind of final scenarios, which is what tomorrow I think will be, and of course in Wroclaw. So I think that is one of the things I'm taking into this. In terms of record, in terms of our ability away from home to put in big performances, we haven't seen it. We just haven't. It's a bit like the pre-Liverpool game, where we hadn't beaten a team of that quality for such a long period of time. Logic on record, it's why many people don't think Chelsea are going to get over the line, and I don't think you can blame them. What you're hoping is that Forest, who've only won one of their last 5 games, will have the fragility. Maybe Murillo, who I know in terms of accurate long balls is actually top for them this year in terms of playing a direct game when they're having to sit a little bit deeper. If Murillo is not in that defence, that could be a big bonus for Chelsea, because obviously he's been a really dominant centre-back for them across the course of the season, and any of those margins that Chelsea can gain advantage of is obviously huge for a game like tomorrow. But I do think it will be close, and it's about whether Chelsea's individuals, can Cole Palmer, spoiler alert, of course he's starting, but can Cole Palmer step up with a performance that unfortunately we haven't seen that much of in the second half of the season? Can we have some genius like we saw against Man United? That is going to be the big thing. So my final Premier League predicted starting 11 of the season: Rob Sanchez in goal. We know Philip Jorgensen is going to be starting in Wroclaw, so Rob Sanchez, who listen, he can become a bit of a hero if he has a great performance tomorrow. I still think Chelsea need to upgrade. I still think if you compare Sanchez to Celts, you're talking about two goalkeepers and what Chelsea could have been if they had a better goalkeeper. I still think Sanchez has cost Chelsea this year, but undeniably in the closing stages of this season, he has got improvement and he has kept a few clean sheets, which you've got to give him credit for as a goalkeeper. The back four, I think Reece James has to start. I think that Reece, you just saw his mentality, you saw his influence and creative influence. You think in tight games and you saw the difference he made with that right foot of his. You need to have moments of genius. You want to conjure up as much of that as you possibly can, because to think that Chelsea are going to go to Nottingham Forest and just blow them away, I mean, we'd all be in heaven watching that, right? But I just can't, I cannot see it. I cannot see with the focus, with the tension, with the nerves, with what's at stake, that happening. And I think that you want those individuals who in a moment, in a flash, in a turn, in just one moment can completely change the dynamic of the game. And that is exactly what Reece James can bring, as we saw last weekend. I think a lot of people will go with Tosin, and I can't completely disagree with them, because if you look at what Tosin has brought and when he's been utilised by Enzo Maresca, it's been against more direct, physically imposing teams. And you think about the threat, the main goal-scoring threat for Nottingham Forest is, of course, Chris Wood. So you're maybe looking at set pieces, you're looking at crosses into the box, and that is one of the things that Tosin excels at. I'm going to go Trev. I think Trev has had an excellent end to the season, and with that England call up, for me, Trevor's got to start one of these last two games, and I think that his performances, particularly against the likes of Liverpool, just so high caliber, even away at Newcastle, which of course was a defeat, but I think him and Colwell, I've really liked watching that partnership grow at the end of the season. And also from a creative point of view, I do think Trev is just a little bit more influential and can play passes that I just think Tosin isn't quite capable of doing. Again, is that the biggest factor for you? I wouldn't be surprised if Tosin starts, I have to say. From the moment I saw that lineup against United, I did kind of think, and watching Maresca's evidence across the course of the season, it may be another game where he plays Tosin, purely for that physical threat and direct threat that, of course, Nottingham Forest are going to provide. Levi and Cucurella, I think, will make up the back four. Can Cucurella step up one more time, or hopefully two more times if you add in Roclaw, and pop up with another huge goal for Chelsea? I think Romeo Lavia has to start this game. I don't know why he doesn't. I don't want to see a situation where Caicedo's playing right back. I would like to see a scenario where Lavia, Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez play as a midfield three. I don't know why you wouldn't do it. I think it gives you a stability and hopefully enough progression and creativity from Enzo himself to push him further up the pitch, give him license to get into the 6-yard box, potentially get himself on the end of chances, which we've seen him get better over the course of the season, and score some big goals himself. Lavia cannot play in the Europa Conference League final, so him not starting here makes absolutely no sense. And I think hopefully it would almost be a preview to what we're going to see hopefully a lot more next season, when you could have Reece James at right back and you can have a midfield that contains Lavia, Caicedo, building that chemistry with Enzo Fernandez a little bit more in front. The main reason as well is I just can't see Tyreek George starting again. I just don't think the experiment worked against Manchester United. Yes, Maresca has confirmed that both Mark Guiu and Christopher Nkunku will be in the squad, but I don't think either of them are starting this game. Nkunku because he just clearly isn't in Chelsea's long-term plans, and Guiu hasn't kicked a competitive ball since February. And is a raw young striker. Yes, he brings a more physically imposing kind of centre-forward frame, but no, I don't expect him to start this game. So I think the front three will be Cole Palmer, Pedro Neto and Noni Madueke. I think what we can say for certain is that Noni, I think should be playing on the left. I think then it becomes a big conversation of who you have down the centre. Do you have Pedro Neto, who has shown in glimpses that he can play that centre-forward role in an all-right fashion? The problem is, I think if it's a transitional game, I think it makes more sense. If it's a game where we're looking, to him as kind of a focal point, then obviously that becomes an issue because you can't hit direct to him. Chelsea are going to have to be a lot more coy and subtle and kind of working in that fluid motion between a front three to really make a difference. And of course, Cole Palmer, who, yes, we know, I think you want him inside that 6-yard box. You want him in front of goal, taking shots at goal. However, we know what he can do in that kind of that middle ground as effectively a number 10, but also off the right where we saw him flourish for Chelsea last season. However, again, I just think this will be the three that starts the game. Because again, I know George made some runs last week, and I think, you know, for such a young guy to be under that pressure in such a big game, you know, I'm not, you know, grilling him for it. You know, it's just, I just think in terms of what I'd want from this game, the options available, my instinct is that Maresca will go in this fashion. Is that the 11 that will be good enough to get Chelsea Champions League football? I really hope it is. I think obviously Caicedo will have to have another monster performance. We know Enzo Fernandez hopefully creatively can, you know, put in a level of creation and influence that really makes the difference. And can Cole Palmer step up on a really big day for Chelsea? It would be the perfect time to do it. So that is my 11. That is my thoughts, feelings and everything ahead of tomorrow's game. Obviously post-game tomorrow, and especially on Monday. It probably will be tomorrow evening. I'll be giving you my breakdown and reaction of whatever happens at Nottingham Forest versus Chelsea. And then on Monday, we're going to go straight into the Europa Conference League final because it's a very quick turnaround to that game. But those are my thoughts, feelings. Subscribe, like, if you're listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, please give us a positive rating review. It really helps the show out. Thank you for watching all of my previews. I know we've got one more left, but especially in the Premier League this season and the support this season. So let's hope Chelsea can one more time go over the line and get us Champions League football. All the best.